Okay, so this is the situation that we have. We have these two tables, the player table and the sport table. And now we want to link these up using a foreign key, right? But before we link them up, let's try and understand the relationship between the two tables. If we were to look from the player side to the sport side in our ER diagram, in the entity relationship diagram, if we were to look from this side to this side, we can say that one player can play one sport only. One player can play one sport only. So there's a one-to-one relationship when we're looking from the player side to the sport side. But if we were to look from the sport side towards the player side, if we were to look this way, right, we can say that one sport can be played by many players. So one sport can be played by many players. So that's the relationship. So there is a one to many relationship if we are looking from the sport side to the player side. Okay, so now comes the question, which one of these two tables, sport or player, which one of these two tables is going to get the foreign key? And remember, the foreign key is always going to come towards the many side. So it is the player table to which we are going to be adding the foreign key. So let's see how we can do that in the SQL. So in SQL, what we want to do now is we want to alter the design of table player. We want to add a new field called sport ID, whose data type is going to be integer, and we want this port ID to be the foreign key. So we're going to say foreign key port ID, and this foreign key is basically linked to the sport ID in the sport table. So we're going to say this foreign key references the sport table, and basically it references the sport ID in the sport table. So this is what we're doing now. What we're doing is that not only have we declared sport ID as the foreign key, we've also shown which table does it link to. It links to the sport table, and within the sport table it links to the field called sport ID, right? So this sport ID in the player table is linked to the sport ID in the sport table. Now when we execute this, oh, I should not highlight this. Let me execute it once again. If I execute this, um, this has been added. So let's take a look at the player table real quick. I want to take a look at the player table, and this new column should show up, right? So we have the sport ID now added. Of course, the values are yet to be added. Sport ID for Roger Federer, let's add a sport ID for Roger Federer. Now, just remember this, that these are all the valid sport IDs. Now, because this sport ID field is linked to the sport ID field in the player table, right? We can only choose a value for sport ID that exists in the sport table. So in the sport table, the valid IDs are 1 to 7, for example. So I can't choose a value like 10, right? I can't give Roger Federer a sport ID of 10 because the valid IDs, sport IDs in the sport table are between 1 to 7. So if I try something like this, if I, for example, want to set this value equals to 10, the database should not allow me to. The database is going to not allow this because the sport table does not have a sport ID of 10. So if I want to, because this is an existing record for Roger Federer, this is an existing record, and I just want to I just want to set this field value. I'm going to say that I want to update the player table, right? And I want to set the value of sport ID to 10, which obviously won't work. Uh, where the player ID is 1. So Roger Federer's ID was 1. So what I'm doing here is I want to set this value only for an existing record, right? I want to set the value of sport ID. I want to set it to 10, and I've given the player ID as 1. So Roger Federer's sport ID needs to be set to 10. And we know this is not going to work because we don't have 10 as a sport ID in the sport table. Remember, these two are linked. Now the sport ID in the player table is linked to the sport ID in the sport table. So when I execute this, it's going to give me an error. And if you take a look at the error, it's mentioning that it is because of the foreign key constraint. You are trying to add a value that's not there in the sport table. So let's go back. Let's take a look at the ID for tennis, sport ID for tennis is 2. So if I was to just use 2 as the sport ID for Roger Federer, right, and execute this, and now what I can do is I can just take a look at my table, right? If I execute this, you can see that Roger Federer's ID uh, has been added, right? It has been updated. Now I also know that Novak Djokovic plays tennis. Maria Sharapova plays tennis. Djokovic's ID is 4 and Maria Sharapova's ID is 7. I am going to update both of these in one go. So I want both of them to have the sport ID of 2 because both of them play tennis. And here I want to, in the where clause, I would say that update it for player number 4 and also update it. So I'm going to say updated where id is equal to 4 or also updated where id, I should not say id, so id equals 7. So basically what we are saying here is that this update statement is going to set the sport id equals to 2 uh, in the record where id is 4 or also the record where id is 7. So when I execute this, and I would just let me execute this statement once again, and you'll see that now Djokovic has the ID 2 and Sharapova has the ID 2. Now for Hassan Ali, whose player ID is 5, and Shoaib Akhtar, whose player ID is 6, the sport ID is 3. Cricket has a sport ID of 3. So let's just go back. We want to set the sport ID to 3 for Hassan Ali, whose ID is 5, and Shoaib Akhtar, whose ID is 6. I'm just going to execute this, and these two IDs have also been updated. So let me just run this statement again to show you that these two IDs have been updated, right? So I hope you've understood the concept. We're now going to take a look at how we can join these two tables. How can we join the player table and the sport table and run combined queries on these two.